Welcome to Cogito Design, the video series where we take a deep dive into some of the cutting-edge ideas within the tabletop game design industry. In this series, we take a deep dive into specific board game mechanisms. We look at their history, their pros, cons, and all the interesting innovations that designers have made with them. And if you're a board game nerd like me, then prepare for something special, because if you took all board games designed through history, blended them together, boiled down the remains, and strained what was left through a fine cheesecloth, this is the mechanism I think you would be left with. A mechanism so simple, the entire definition is contained within the name. I'm talking, of course, of roll and write. As regular viewers will know, we have just launched our very own roll and write game, Luddite. Luddite is a campaign game where you play as hackers trying to destroy AI robots that have started to take over from humanity in the dark dystopian world of the game. What's novel about this game is that it's played as you read a graphic novel, illustrated by our fabulously talented friend Adam Beachy. But as with all games, no matter how novel they seem, Luddite is a product of all the games and designers that went before it. In the process of developing Luddite, we played a huge number of roll and write games and learned a lot about the history of this fascinating mechanism. The definition of roll and write is admittedly fairly obvious. In these games, you take one or several dice, roll them, then record the values on paper or perhaps dry erasable boards. A fairly simple premise, but this of course is only the beginning. From these humble beginnings, a vast cornucopia of games and innovations have sprung. I mean, there are roll and write games now that don't even involve dice, but more on that later. The origins of roll and write games are essentially the origins of tabletop games themselves. Dice are very probably the oldest gaming implements known to humanity. There is an ancient tradition of casting lots to divine the future, but almost as ancient is the tradition of tossing marked ankle bones from sheep and buffalo, not to tell the future, but to engage in the present, to play. The game of knucklebones is so ingrained in humanity that it seems to have been independently invented in some form or other by tribes of humanity from across the globe, with archaeological digs uncovering a weirdly large amount of these straggly bones in ancient human settlements. From this, and surprisingly quickly, came the modern D6 dice we know and love today. Amazingly, these creations actually remain largely unchanged. The ancient Greeks tried to claim them, with Sophocles saying they were invented to while away time during the siege of Troy. But, in reality, they are far, far older than this. In fact, dice astoundingly similar to our own appear in ancient Sanskrit writings and even Egyptian tombs from over 4,000 years ago. So, it's worth skipping forwards in time a few millennia to Liar's Dice style games that date back to the 15th century. Liar's Dice asks you to roll multiple dice and bluff on their results. This led to games like poker dice, but then in the 20th century, these dice rolling games developed a new aspect, where dice were not just rolled, but their results were recorded, and those written records had an impact on the following rounds. And it was here that the first true roll and write games were born. It is unclear exactly where the first of these games came from, but probably the most important of these was a game called Yacht. According to the admittedly possibly biased Hasbro, the game Yacht was invented by an unnamed Canadian couple who liked to play the game on the deck of their boat. They taught Yacht to the Polish-American entrepreneur Edwin Lowe, who, as a side note, is even more famous for having popularised and indeed named the game Bingo. It had previously been called Beano. But back to Yacht according to Hasbro. Lowe purchased the rights to Yacht from the couple in exchange for no money. All they asked for was 1,000 printed copies of the game for them to play with their friends. Perhaps a mistake in hindsight, given the popularity of what Lowe made from their creation, But then again, given their lifestyle seems to have involved creating games aboard their own yacht, perhaps they didn't need the money. Lowe again slightly changed the name of yacht into, you guessed it, Yahtzee. Whilst it should be said there are other games that claim to predate Yahtzee, such as the game Guffey from 1952, what is uncontroversial is that Yahtzee was the first massively successful roll and write game. Little actually changed in the mechanism for many years, even despite some interesting innovations from games like The Great Races and Can't Stop Express. The next really big event for the mechanism came in 2003, when legendary game designer Rainer Knizia created a small game called Decathlon. In Decathlon, players roll and re-roll dice, using the results to compete in a variety of athletic events. And the player with the best score wins. This game was actually given away for free, and still is available to this very day on Knizia's site. This game was a forerunner in the style of games we've come to know from the modern roll and write revolution, but it wasn't until 2017-18 that things really started to heat up. The release of a few big games suddenly caused an explosion in the mechanism. And what an explosion it was. At the time of writing, there are 872 roll and write games listed on BoardGameGeek, and 762 of them were released on or after 2017. This explosion has seen many innovations in the field. One quite common occurrence is that roll and write editions of previously published games have started to become very common as a method of reigniting sales in an existing IP. This probably started with the release of the Catan dice game back in 2007, but has been seen many times again since. Another innovation in the mechanism was to move away from the very item that started it all, the dice. Games like Welcome To keep the nature of the random event being recorded, but instead of dice, they ask you to flip some cards. The recent release of Joan of Arc, or Lyon, combines both of these innovations neatly with a roll and write adaptation of the sublime Orléans Euro game. Joan of Arc also forgoes the traditional dice and instead asks players to draw tokens from a bag to provide the random input needed. And anyone who's watched this channel for a while will know we are big fans of everything Orléans. In our latest game, Luddite, we've tried to innovate on the mechanism in two ways. The first is mechanical. We have added a clock mechanism which asks players to add one of their dice each round to this section of their player board. This acts as a clock for the game where players must cause as much damage to the AI they are attacking as they can before the last box is crossed off. As they need to get to the exit before then, they are incentivized to use only low-numbered dice on these spaces. But the larger the number you put into the clock, the bigger the damage score you gain from this module. This contradiction in motivations adds tension to each game, and of course, Sid Meier's central aim of game design, interesting decisions. And the second thing we've done is created a game within a graphic novel. One of the great aspects of a roll and write game is the minimal tools needed to play them. This means we think it's a perfect mechanism to use to update the classic choose-your-own-adventure style story games. Instead of the simple move to this page if choices, in Luddite you will play a full tabletop game to progress your story in the graphic novel. So what is it that has captured the attention of so many board gamers over the years with this mechanism? Why is its use escalating so much in the last few years, and does the mechanism have any inherent drawbacks? So it's now time to look at the pros and cons of roll and write. So on the pro side, there are many things to consider. First, by its very nature, roll and write forces games to focus on input rather than output randomness. As this is an idea I've spoken about in much more detail in other videos, I won't say too much here, but in essence, these two flavours of luck have to do with what happens after a random event occurs. Input randomness has the random action first, then allows players to decide what to do after. Think drawing some cards from a deck, then deciding how to play with them. However, Output randomness has the random action itself decide the event with no further input from the players. Think rolling dice and moving that many spaces in Chutes and Ladders. Whilst there are benefits to both approaches, it's no secret that we at Cogito Design prefer the former approach. Player agency is a crucial part of our designs, and Roll and Write delivers it in spades. The randomness itself is a great asset of these games, as it allows them to have a high level of replayability. Each round, new dice are rolled, and this repeated injection of input randomness over multiple rounds, when combined with clever design and multiple paths to victory, can mean that experiences can vary dramatically from game to game. Another plus for these games is their uncanny ability to work at virtually any player count. They are fantastic for creating interesting puzzles and so can be rewarding solo experiences, but in addition to this, because players tend to play on their own board from the communal dice, they can scale in player count almost indefinitely. Welcome 2, for example, lists its player count as 1 to 100 players, and that's only because Board Game Geek doesn't allow any higher than this. Related to this is how small and replayable these games can be. By their very nature, roll and write games often require little more than a pen, some dice, and something to write on. This makes production of the games much easier than, say, a giant legacy game with miniatures and endless tokens and cards. This could, however, also be considered a con of the mechanism, as board gaming is a fundamentally tactile activity, and these big box beautiful games will always have their appeal. But it's still nice to have games that pack a really crunchy, puzzly punch without breaking the bank. It also helps mitigate another potential issue with roll and write games. Games that ask you to write on components have a less permanent and more disposable feel to them. Welcome 2 provides you with a hefty stack of game sheets to play with, but these will eventually run out. As we discussed in our video on legacy games, many board gamers see themselves as collectors as much as gamers. They see their games as part of a collection to be played, yes, but also kept and treasured. So a game with a shelf life is a big negative to these players. That being said, the cost to produce these games really helps mitigate this, and many others will simply use dry wipe markers to evade this issue almost entirely. The final point I'll discuss is the simultaneous nature of most of these games. This can lead them to being accused of that dreaded board game slight, multiplayer solitaire, a game with limited or non-existent player interaction. While classic Eurogamers may love this element, many other gamers prefer to have a little more impact on each other's games than a standard roll and write allows. Although this can also be mitigated by designers, such as in Twilight Inscription, where players can all vote on communal agenda cards that impact the game, and they can compete in battles where their strength in certain areas of their maps are compared. That being said, the simultaneous play aspect of roll and write designs almost completely removes downtime from games, since dice are rolled together and utilised in unison. You may have to wait for your opponent until the next roll, but compared to classic turn-taking games, even those afflicted with the dreaded analysis paralysis shouldn't slow down the game too much. So, in essence, there really are a lot of reasons why roll and write has become such a popular staple of the modern board game diet. These games seem to boil down the very essence of the modern Eurogame renaissance into the core of what people love. There are simple rules, engaging gameplay, and interesting decisions, all within games that are comparatively a fraction of the price of their big box brethren. While the genre may not appeal to all gamers, if you ask me, roll and write games are possibly the most quintessential board game mechanism we have. Thank you so much for watching. As I mentioned earlier, our roll and write campaign game Luddite is live on Kickstarter right now. So if you're interested, we'd love for you to check out the Kickstarter page, which I've linked in the description below. Our game simply cannot be made without your help, so any support towards our campaign will be very much appreciated. And if you liked this video and found it useful, I'd love it if you could like and subscribe to show your support of my channel. And last but not least, Thank you so much to our loyal patrons who help us bring you these videos. Thank you. See you next time. Bye.